Hey, my name is Ella and I'm 25 years old.
I live in Leicestershire. I used to be a psychology student. I've nearly finished my degree, and at the moment I work in journalism. Last year, when I was 24, my mum died, so I guess that's like a huge part of my identity now, and something that I would always tell people quite quickly. And yeah, she died of cancer after a whole year of fighting, I guess. So yeah, that's kind of it really. That's me. I have a dog. I inherited my mum's dog, so I love walking with my dog. I love yoga, and yeah, that's it. And I love reading as well. So yeah, that's basically me.
You said that you get that across pretty soon that you lost your mum. Why is that?
I think I've always been somebody that's like a bit of an oversharer. If you sit next to me like at dinner, like I will pretty much tell you my life story like within like 15 minutes. But I think after my mum became ill and she died, it was just always like my whole life was just grief. It was just like consuming, and it kind of started to define me. And I used to think that was a bad thing, but I've sort of come to terms with the fact now that it isn't a bad thing, and it's something that I want to be like a huge grief advocate. So I always get the gist when I talk to someone. I'll tell them my mum died, and I'll kind of see how they react. And if they react well, like not awkward, I'll continue the conversation like a bit further and talk about grief with them. And like everybody I talk to, I try and be kind of like spread awareness basically, and make them less uncomfortable about talking about grief.
Yeah. Why is it important to you?
My mum died, and I struggled with anticipatory grief. So the grief before she died, I started grieving her death basically. It was just hugely invalidated. And I feel like this is a term that gets thrown around a lot on Instagram, and it's something I use a lot. And it was basically this whole thing that it was like toxic positivity. So people would be like, oh, like chin up, like it's not like it could have been worse, or at least you got to be with her and she died, or at least this, at least that. And there was always this pressure to find a silver lining. And there wasn't one, because I lost the most important person in my life, and she suffered before she died. She was really poorly. And she was 54. Like there's no nice way of putting that, and it just made people uncomfortable that was the truth, that was the reality. And also, the second to that, it was that a lot of people I speak to in my daily life had never experienced a big loss, and if they had, they were quite old. And I think that, not to take that away from them at all, because any loss is huge, but when you're young and you experience loss, I think it is, your coping mechanisms are different. It's not there, like you haven't got the coping mechanisms, and you have to learn them, and you have to find out what they are. And I found that people were invalidating that as well. They were kind of like, oh, well, you've got the rest of your life to get over this and do this, that and the other. So they just completely didn't understand, and it really affected my grief, and I ended up having delayed grief. So for about 3 months after my mum died, I was just living my life as if I was absolutely fine, as if nothing had happened to me. And I was like working out all the time. I wanted to go and get a job. I just wanted to jump straight back into life, because I just felt so numb, and because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. No one ever told me that it was okay for me to just actually not be okay, and that they would support me through that. So now I try to advocate that grief has absolutely no timeline. Like you will live with it forever. It will change, but you'll live with it forever. And that basically you need support in that, and realising that and coming to terms with that, and people just weren't giving me that at all. So
yeah. And where are you at with your grief journey now?
So I think that I'm nearly a year on. In January it will be a whole year since my mum died on the 21st. I think that I've very much started to learn to live with my loss, if that makes sense. Like I've gone back to work. Day to day my life is nice. Like I have a nice life, if that makes sense. But the grief is still very much there. Like when you go to bed at night, it's there. Like when you wake up in the morning, it's there. Like, between every kind of thought in my day, it's there. Like, and then some days it's a lot worse. Like it will be all consuming, and I call it like a grief intensive day where, I'll probably have to cancel my plans or rearrange what I'm doing and sort of work around my grief more. And then other days, it's not really there. I'm not going to lie. It's kind of like more in the background. So I'd say that's where I'm at.
Yeah. And you were saying a second ago that like sometimes it can be just not understood really by people, like how the grief journey is? Like, what has your journey with grief been like?
So awful. I think anyone that has lost somebody that they really truly love, what I would call like a life-changing loss, they know that it's just, grief is horrific. Like, you really do suffer. Like, it's not just like a breakup of a relationship. It's not like losing a job and being made redundant. All things that you will experience. You will experience feelings of grief in them, of course. I've been through a huge breakup and I felt grief. But this is just, the pain is so deep, like it runs deep and you feel it in your bones, literally. Like, it will keep you awake at night, it will make you sleep for days on end. Like, it's like having a never-ending kind of depression. That's kind of what it feels like, and you cannot see the light out of that. And I think that there's nothing you can do about that, but we can just help people in our society validate grief a little bit more, kind of learn that if we're supported better, I feel like that would help. That would have helped me earlier in my journey hugely if I had the right support.
Your Instagram page is a massive part of what's helped me process losing my mum, and just even knowing like I'm not alone is massive. But why did you start that Instagram page?
It fit me so much to hear that from you. So I started the grief guide out of a really, really lonely place. I would say at the time I was almost probably suicidal. I had just nobody. I had like no friends in the lockdown. My friends understood, but nobody really understands. And I felt like my dad and me were on different pages a little bit with our grief, and the rest of my family were kind of dealing with their grief in a different way to mine. And I just kind of started it to connect with the grief community online that I knew was kind of there. And I just wanted to like dip my toe in it. And then it kind of just snowballed, the whole thing. Like, I just started making my own content, and I started trying to make content that I would have wanted to see at the beginning of my grief journey. Yeah, I created it out of just a place of complete loneliness and not wanting other people to feel that way either. But also selfishly, like, I wanted to connect with people that had also been through loss, because I just felt like, I remember I would go on my Instagram in the evening on the grief guide. I would switch it from my personal account, and it would just feel like going home. That's honestly what it felt like. I would see things that other people had written, and just like you said, like, you just don't feel alone in it.
I definitely resonated with a lot of what you were saying, and I feel like sometimes people just don't understand grief and they get a lot of things wrong about it. But over the past year, like, is there anything that comes to mind to you of what people get wrong about grief?
So there's a couple of like defining moments where I have absolutely been invalidated, and I can remember exactly what they said. I remember going to my old job, and this is before my mum had died. I'd asked for some time off, and my boss I went in and he said, you know, as long as it's a good outcome, I don't really care. And he was like, you need to come back to work. Like, you're becoming a real burden. Like, you're becoming an inconvenience. It's a nightmare for us. And I tried to explain that, you know, I understood that, but, you know, this was just something that had completely come out of the blue, my mum having cancer, and that it wasn't going to be a good outcome. And after that, he just never replied to me. They never got back in contact with me. They paid me, but I never heard from them again. And then there's been other times where people have said to me, I know you're still going through this, but, as if like they're waiting for my grief to kind of pass or end. Like, and I think so it's comments like that that have just sort of fueled this journey with the grief guide. I think that a lot of people think that grief ends and it has a timeline, and they're very scared of that from the outside, so they kind of just back away and they want to wait for it to end. And yeah, like, I just got to a point where I was sick of being invalidated hugely. And yeah, I just created, like, I just wanted to like shout at them, and basically I did that through the grief guide. So
what did you want them to hear in those moments?
I wanted them to know how much it hurt to be invalidated, because when you invalidate somebody's grief, so you infer that it's not as bad as it is, or you kind of pretend it's not happening, you're basically invalidating the love that we have for the person that died. And that's the most insulting thing that you can do to somebody. And I think that I wanted them to know that grieving never ends. Like, I have to live with this forever and ever. And that the least they could do is hear that out and respect that and kind of acknowledge that. And I wanted them to know that also that grief looks really different on every person. A big thing that people would say to me as well, like, you're so lucky that you got to care for your mum and be with her. And, it was just kind of like, it was definitely not, none of it was lucky about losing your mum at 24. So
like when people pass away, I'm obviously still realizing this and coming to terms with it, but I feel like a person's life lives on through people, and I think as daughters our mothers live through us. But I'd love to get a bit of a sense of like what your mum was like, if you're comfortable talking about it. Like what was her name, like what was your favorite thing about her?
Well, thank you for asking me that. Her name was Sharon. My mum was like very, very caring, very, very empathetic and compassionate. She had a lot to do with charities when she was alive. She was a real feminist, really outspoken feminist, and I think she's passed that kind of like that fieriness down to me. I like to think so anyway. But she also had that like real empathy with it. So I think she was very good at putting herself in other people's shoes. And that's something that every day, like I think that's her legacy with me, that she was just so good at that I'm trying to master that from her, even though she's not here. And I want that to be her legacy. When she was dying, I always said to her like, oh, I won't let this define me. I'll have a good life. I'll make sure that I'm okay. And now actually, like, I've done the opposite. Like, I want this to define me. Like, I want, I'm okay with being a grief advocate, and I want, I want to help other people that are grieving. And I think that she would be so happy that that is her legacy, and that my pain has kind of, something has come from my pain. And I'm not saying that everybody should have that view, but for me, I think you mentioned earlier, like you needed to, kind of make something of your pain, or like channel it through something. And I think the Grief Guide has definitely done that for me. I think that I always think if the tables were turned and if she had lost me, I think she would have done something about it. Like she would have maybe started something similar or done something. So that's what I wanted to give her. Like I wanted her legacy to be like love, basically, and empathy and compassion, and doing something with my pain and loss, like to help others. And she was just like, honestly, I just feel like the world is not a good place without her. Obviously, like just through losing one person can make the world feel so empty. And as like each day you just haven't got that person to call anymore. Like she was like my best friend, and I don't say that lightly. I really knew the meaning of a true best friend for my mum. She was amazing.
Since the start of this interview, I can see pieces of Sharon in you, and that like fieriness, fierceness, lovingness, empathy, like it really does shine through in you as well.
Thank you so much.
And if that's like her mark on your life, and like you mentioned legacy a little bit there, like what mark do you want to leave on people's lives?
I think if I can leave this world the way that my mum did, hopefully I get longer on earth. I know her life was cut short too early. I just want to be remembered the way that she is, which is she left this world being completely loved. Like no one had a bad word to say about her, and everyone thought the same thing, that she was so kind and caring and the bestest friend you could ask for. And also that she wanted change. Like she wasn't afraid to call out for change and ask for change in things, and she was definitely an activist, and she did things in her career and her life and made a difference to other people. So if I could go out the same way, I would be happy.
If you look at your life, what do you think your why is?
So I think my why, I've thought about this, my why is kind of different things that create one kind of drive, if that makes sense. And I just want people to feel less alone in grief. That's the main reason. And I want more awareness around grief and loss, especially in young people. I definitely feel like people in their 20s are forgotten about a little bit in grief. We don't get enough like love that we deserve by society or the media or everything, and I want that to change. And after being in that place where you just feel totally alone and totally isolated, I want to live in a world where nobody feels like that anymore. And I want to help create that. And I don't want things like my account to have to exist anymore. I want it just to be that you are completely supported by your friends and family and everybody gets it. And I want there to be a grief movement and where that happens, basically. And I want to help create that.